Montana Territory, February 1884. The sky was the color of iron, heavy with snow, and the wind howled off the mountains like it was hunting something. Lorna Ashford could barely see beyond her own breath, each exhale puffing out white and desperate as she dragged her legs through the waist-deep snow. Her coat, wool but thin, clung to her body, soaked through. Her gloves had gone missing hours ago, lost, or maybe she had taken them off without realizing, fingers numb and clumsy from the cold. She had not seen another soul since dawn. Her horse, a sturdy dun mare named Maple, had collapsed under the weight of the storm before noon. Lorna had cried for a minute, just a minute, then pulled the satchel from the saddle and kept moving east. She had to reach help. She had to find someone, because back at the cabin her babies, Savannah and Samuel, only 6 and 4. She had left them bundled under every blanket they owned beside the stove, a few sticks of wood left, and barely a scrap of food between them. Fever had taken Savannah last night. Lorna had known then there was no choice. Either she walked out into the storm to find help, or she would lose them both by morning. And now her knees buckled. She dropped, snow swallowing her hips, then her waist again. She tried to force herself back up, but her legs were shaking too hard. She fell forward, hands sinking into the snow like it was water. "No," she whispered, voice hoarse, lips cracked. "No, no, not yet." But her body had stopped listening. She crumpled sideways, cheek pressed against the snow. The wind screamed overhead, and the sky dimmed further. Her lashes froze together. She thought of Savannah's small hand on her cheek last night, hot and trembling. She thought of Samuel, asking if the storm would stop by morning. She closed her eyes. Elijah Abbott rode with his head low, hat brim crusted in ice, scarf stiff around his neck. He had spotted the tracks 30 minutes ago, messy, weaving, like someone was staggering. He followed them, even when they disappeared beneath the wind-blown drifts, because something in his gut told him whoever made them was still out here, and they were dying. He was not supposed to be out this far. He had been working the line with his partner 2 ridges over, checking trap markers. But when the snow rolled in hard from the northwest, Elijah had peeled off to head east. It was instinct more than anything else. That, and the way the wind carried the sound of something wrong. He crested a rise, squinting against the snow. There, a shape, small, dark, still. He kicked his gelding into a trot, careful not to spook the animal too fast in the deep snow. "Hey!" he shouted, sliding off his saddle as soon as he was close enough. His boots sank deep. "Hey! Can you hear me?" No movement. He stumbled the last few feet, heart hammering, and dropped to his knees beside her. A woman, face pale, lips blue. Snow crusted her lashes. Her fingers were bare and white, her coat stiff as bark. He pressed his hand against her cheek, cold, but not gone. "Come on," he muttered, pulling off his gloves and working her arms. "Wake up. Come on, lady." She groaned faintly. The sound was so weak he barely registered it. "I got you," he said, voice low, steady now. "You are not dying out here." He wrapped her in his oilskin duster, then hoisted her into his arms. She was light, too light, and limp against his chest. He mounted up with her held tight and turned the gelding back toward his line shack, a mile and a half west, the wind biting but his jaw set. Lorna woke to warmth. Took her a full minute to realize what she was feeling. Her brain fought it, but slowly, the burning in her fingers made sense. She was wrapped in something heavy. A fire crackled nearby. Her lips were dry, but no longer frozen. She blinked. Above her was a wooden ceiling, log walls, the sound of wind, but muted, then movement. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, came into view. He was pouring hot water into a tin basin, his face rough with stubble, eyes dark and sharp under thick brows. His coat was hung near the fire, steam rising from it. "You are awake," he said, setting the basin aside and kneeling next to the cot. "Good." Where her voice cracked, she coughed. "You are safe," he answered. "Found you maybe an hour before dark. You were near gone." She tried to sit up. He pressed a hand gently to her shoulder. "Do not. You have frostbite starting in your hands and feet. You need to rest." "My children," she rasped, panic flooding her. She grabbed at his shirt weakly. "They are alone. In the cabin. My daughter is sick." "Please," he nodded, already standing. "Where?" 12 miles west. Through the timber. A red-roofed cabin. The stove is out, there is no food. "I will find them," he said. "I promise." She sagged back, breath shaking. He moved fast, gathering supplies. Rifled through a crate, found canned beans and dried meat. Pulled on his coat and hat, slipped a rifle over his shoulder. Before he left, he paused at the door and looked back at her. "My name is Elijah Abbott. I will be back with your children before sunrise." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I am Lorna," she whispered. He gave her one last look, steady, sure, and disappeared into the night. He returned before dawn, boots soaked, carrying 2 exhausted, shivering children in his arms. Lorna cried as she pulled them close, her hands still wrapped in bandages. Her body weak but her heart stronger than it had been in days. Elijah built up the fire, fed the kids, and stayed close as they slept. Lorna watched him from the cot, her eyes on the quiet way he moved, the care in his hands. "You saved my whole world," she murmured. He looked at her, eyes softening. "You walked 12 miles through a blizzard for them. You saved them." Their eyes held for a long moment. The snow still howled outside, but inside, there was warmth now. Real warmth. And something else. Something beginning. The storm passed in the night, but its memory clung to the land. Trees groaned beneath their icy burdens, and smoke from the shack's chimney rose straight into a pale sky. Inside, the warmth held steady, though the fire had settled into coals. Lorna sat propped against the wall, a quilt tucked to her collarbone. Her fingers, wrapped in linen, trembled as she ladled broth into Savannah's cup. Elijah had shown her how to brace the handle with her wrist, so the weight didn't strain the frostbitten skin. The girl sipped carefully, cheeks still flushed with fever, but her eyes were clearer this morning. Samuel perched on a stool near the hearth, nibbling on a piece of cornmeal biscuit Elijah had made. The boy didn't speak much, though his eyes never wandered far from his sister. Elijah stepped inside from the lean-to, brushing snow from his sleeves. He carried a bundle of firewood and a strip of rabbit meat tied with string. "I set 2 more snares down by the creek," he said, laying the wood beside the hearth. "Tracks look fresh. Might have more come morning." Lorna met his eyes. "You've done more than I could. You don't owe me gratitude," he said, not harshly, just plain. He knelt to stoke the embers. "You did what you had to. Now I'm doing the same." She studied him as he worked. His coat hung open, revealing a wool shirt worn thin at the elbows. His hands were rough, nails dark from work, and the way he moved quiet, deliberate, spoke of a man used to living with silence. "Where's your family?" she asked. He didn't look up. "My brother and I came north 2 winters back. He took a bullet out near the mussel shell last spring." "I'm sorry." He nodded once. He was a good man, straight-spoken, better trapper than me. Lorna traced the rim of her tin cup. "You stayed after?" "Didn't see the point in running from a place just because it hurt." She glanced at her children. "I tried to leave once, after my husband passed. Took what I could carry and made it halfway to Miles City before I turned around." Seemed wrong to bury one life and go looking for another before the first had settled. Elijah's gaze found hers. You built something even after. I tried. I'm not sure what's left of it now. He sat back on his heels. You've got 2 children who made it through a storm that would have killed most grown men. That says something. She looked away then, throat tightening. They're all I have. He stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. Then we'll keep them warm and fed until you're strong enough to get home. Back to an empty cabin? Back to land that's still yours. That matters. Savannah stirred under the quilt, and Lorna leaned close, brushing the girl's damp hair from her forehead. Her fingertips were still clumsy, but her touch was steady. Elijah moved toward the door again, pausing with his hand on the frame. There's a ridge east of here, south-facing. Get sun early. If you want, I can ride out in a couple days. See if there's a better place to start fresh. She didn't answer right away. The fire popped, and Samuel shifted on the stool. Finally, she said, "Why would you do that for us?" He didn't turn around. You walked 12 miles through a storm. That kind of will deserves a chance to take root somewhere strong. When the door closed behind him, she felt the quiet settle again, but it didn't press so heavy now. The shack felt less like a stranger's shelter and more like a place that held breath and waiting, like something had begun to thaw. She pulled the children closer beneath the quilt and let her eyes close, not from weakness this time, but from a tiredness she could finally trust to pass. The sun rose pale and late over the valley, casting long shadows across the crusted snow. Elijah watched the light catch on the ridge beyond his lined shack, the way the pine needles glittered like glass. He'd gone out early, cutting a narrow trail to the creek, and returned with a small brace of quail slung over his shoulder. Steam curled from his back as the warmth of the cabin reached him. Inside, Lorna was sitting upright now, her face less drawn, color returning high on her cheekbones. Her hair was damp from washing, pinned back loosely. Samuel was drawing quietly in the corner with a bit of charcoal and a scrap of paper Elijah had found in the bottom of a dry goods crate. Savannah was sleeping again, her breath even. "You found birds," Lorna said as he unwrapped the game. "Better than nothing," Elijah replied, setting about cleaning them. "Once the snow thins, we'll try for mule deer. I've seen tracks near the far slope." She nodded, eyes on his hands. "Your cuts are too clean for someone who learned trapping on his own." "My uncle taught me," he said, "back in Missouri. He was Choctaw, married into my mother's side. Wouldn't waste a single piece of what he took. Said taking a life meant honoring it all the way through." "You carry that well," she murmured. He glanced over. "I try." Lorna shifted her feet beneath the quilt. "My husband never could dress game without making a mess. He was a better carpenter than a hunter. Built the cradle Savannah slept in. It's still in the loft." Elijah didn't answer right away. He laid the birds aside and wiped his hands on a rag. "You planning to go back there when you're strong enough?" She considered that. If the roofs held, if the chimney didn't crack in the cold. Her voice was low, thoughtful. "I'll need a wagon to bring in supplies, and help digging out the barn." He nodded once. "I can haul in what you need. I've got a sled rig for the mule. It's slow, but it'll carry feed and lumber." "I don't like asking," she said, not meeting his eyes. "You didn't." She looked up then, and the quiet between them shifted. Not heavy, not strained, just full. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you." Outside, the wind had gone still. The trees stood silent, snow heavy on their limbs. Elijah stepped to the stove, set a kettle to boil, then turned back toward her. "I'll ride to town in 2 days. McCutcheon's store should have what your girl needs for the fever. And I'll see if the postmaster's still holding your letters." Lorna blinked. "I haven't had a letter since last spring." My aunt was writing from Wisconsin, but she stopped when the railway cut off for repairs. Well, Elijah said, maybe word's waiting. She smiled, faint but sure. You think that kind of thing still finds its way? Sometimes, he said, even through snow. She watched him as he sat near the fire, one hand resting on his knee. The lamp above them flickered as the wick settled deeper into the oil, and the warmth in the room deepened. You lost someone, she said then, not as a question. He didn't flinch. My brother. I thought maybe more. He picked at a loose thread on his cuff. Before the war, there was a girl near St. Louis. She married someone else while I was gone. Lorna didn't press. The fire hissed as a knot in the log split open. I'm not looking for more, she said, voice low. Not now. Neither am I, Elijah said, but his eyes didn't leave hers. Still, there was no tension in the words, just understanding. Savannah stirred, and Lorna reached to brush her daughter's hair back from her brow. The girl sighed and settled again. Elijah stood and moved to the stove. You'll eat first, then sleep. I'll take the night watch. I don't need watching, she said quietly. He ladled broth into a bowl. No, but you've earned the rest. She accepted the bowl from his hands, their fingers grazing. Brief, warm. He didn't speak again, and neither did she. But the silence between them had changed. Not empty, not waiting, just full of something neither had named yet, but neither would turn from. Elijah returned from the ridge with his coat lined in frost and a red welt on his cheek from the wind. The snow had crusted hard overnight, making the trail easier to follow but punishing on the legs. He carried a canvas sack across his back, filled with dried goods and a dark glass bottle wrapped in burlap. Lorna glanced up from where she sat stitching a tear in Savannah's stocking with a bone needle Elijah had carved. You find what you needed? He set the sack beside the hearth, shaking off his gloves. Flour, lard, and a balm for the fever. Old widow downriver keeps still-room herbs. She gave me a mix, she swears, by willow bark, elderflower, horehound. She ask much for it? Just a promise I'd send a pair of boots come thaw. Lorna folded the stocking. That's fair. Elijah crouched beside the hearth, warming his hands. You've got a neighbor half a day's ride west. Norwegian fella. Name's Torsen. Said he'd seen smoke from your place 2 weeks back and figured someone was still living. But the storm kept him in. I remember his wife, Lorna said. She came once with a sack of turnips. Spoke maybe 10 words of English. She died last spring. He's alone now. She was quiet a moment. Seems most folks are. Outside, the sun had begun to slip behind the mountains, casting long blue shadows that stretched like fingers across the snow. Elijah stood and moved to the window, watching the light fade. You always planned to stay out here this long? I didn't plan much, he said. Just kept moving until the noise in my head quieted. Lorna rose slowly, testing her weight. Her steps were steadier now, though she moved with caution. She crossed to the table and began sorting through the sack. You fought? She asked. Union infantry. Tennessee campaign. I was 19. She didn't speak right away. Then, my husband didn't go. He was too young when it started, and by the time he was old enough, it was over. Elijah nodded. Lucky man. No, she said. He wanted to fight. Felt ashamed he hadn't. He met her eyes. That shame's a lie folks carry when they don't know what it means to come home with blood that won't wash off. Lorna looked down at the herbs spread across the table. You sleep much. Some. You ever sleep through the night? He exhaled through his nose. Not since 64. She began measuring out the dried mix into a pot. Her hands moved with quiet precision, though the lines around her mouth had deepened. You ever think about leaving? She asked. No, Not even once? He shook his head. There's something honest about this land. It doesn't tell you what to feel, just shows you what you are. The kettle began to rattle softly, and she poured the steeping brew into a cup, then carried it to Savannah, who blinked awake with a dry cough. Lorna held the cup to her daughter's lips, steady and quiet, then returned to the table. Elijah watched her. "You don't frighten easy." "I did," she said. "A long time ago. And now, I think fear's like frost," she said. "It comes in fast, but it doesn't stay if you keep the fire strong." He touched the edge of the table, fingers drumming once. "I could help rebuild your barn, once the ground thaws. You offering out of kindness? Or because you don't want to go back to that line shack?" He smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Maybe both." A silence passed. This one held a different weight, plain and steady, like fence posts driven deep into frozen ground. "I'll need help with more than the barn," Lorna said finally. "Fencing, feed, keeping the well from freezing come next winter. I know how to dig a new one, and how to run pipe if you've got enough slope." They stood there, the space between them narrowing not from steps taken, but from something understood. "You planning to stay long?" she asked, voice low. Elijah reached into the sack, pulled out a bundle of wrapped cloth, and handed it to her. Inside was a small carving, smooth and pale, an elk, head raised, mid-stride. Not perfect, but careful. A child's toy whittled with time and thought. "For Samuel," he said. "Figured he'd want something that didn't blow away." Her fingers closed around the wood. She looked up at him, and something inside her settled. "Then I suppose," she said, "we'll find room for your coat by the door." By mid-March, the land had begun to loosen its grip on winter. The creek behind the line shack ran stronger, ice breaking apart in slow sheets. The trees no longer groaned under snow, and the mornings smelled faintly of wet pine and thawed earth. Lorna stood at the threshold with a shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, watching Elijah hammer a new hinge onto the sled's yoke. Savannah and Samuel gathered fallen twigs nearby, their boots squelching in the softening ground. She stepped down, careful over the uneven threshold. "That hinge holding now?" Elijah tightened the bolt with a twist of his wrist. "Well enough to carry a gate if we needed. I've got 3 that need replacing," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "The one at the chicken run split clean down the middle. I'll cut new ones from pine near the ridge," he said, standing and brushing sawdust from his hands. "That grove's better than anything closer." "Not too much from it," she said. "Ravens nest high in those trees. They kept mice out of the grain last year." Elijah gave a quiet nod and reached for a canteen tucked beside the sled. "You always talk to trees and birds like they're neighbors?" She looked toward the ridge. "They've been here longer than I have. It seems only polite." He took a drink, then offered it to her. She sipped, the water cold and tasting of iron, and handed it back without a word. They watched the children weaving twigs into a misshapen bundle. "I've been thinking," she said after a while. "The loft in the cabin, if I clear it out, there's room enough for another bed. It stays warm if the stove's banked right." He didn't speak for a moment, just capped the canteen and rested his hand on the sled rail. "I've been thinking too," he said. "The trap lines are thinning, less fur coming in. I was gonna pull them by summer anyway." Lorna bent to pick up a small twig bundle Samuel had dropped. "There's work at the homestead, more than I can do alone." "I know," Elijah said. She looked up at him. "So do we stop circling around what we already know?" The wind lifted softly through the trees. The children's laughter drifted across the slope. Elijah stepped close, slow, deliberate. His gloved hand brushed a strand of damp hair from her brow. "I'm not looking to pass through," he said. "Not anymore. "I don't want a man to shoulder everything," she replied. "I've carried this life. I just want someone who'll walk it beside me." "I can do that," he said, "if you'll have me." Her hand rose to his chest. "I will." His forehead touched hers, their breath mingling, warm in the still cold air. No declarations hung between them, only the steady hum of something rooted and real. That evening, Elijah took the children down to the creek to watch the ice break apart. Lorna stayed back, baking with what little flour remained. She set aside one biscuit for each of them and one more for the old widow downriver, wrapped in linen and tied with a frayed blue ribbon. They ate together by the fire, the cabin lit with lamplight and laughter. Savannah curled against her mother's lap, healthier now, cheeks pink from the walk. Samuel leaned against Elijah's side, carving a crooked wooden shape with a careful hand. Later, when the children had been tucked under quilts in the corner bed, Lorna stood at the door, looking out at the darkening slope. Elijah came to stand beside her. "You'll stay?" she asked, voice low. "I already have." She turned into his chest, his arms steady around her. The silence between them was no longer waiting. It was home. The trees budded slowly that spring, and by early May, the fields beyond the cabin were ready for seed. Elijah built a new gate for the chicken run, just as he said he would, and cleared the loft for a bed he carved with his own hands. Lorna taught him how to keep the stove banked through the windstorms, and he taught Samuel how to track deer without snapping twigs. Savannah planted a line of sweet peas along the porch, and every morning she checked to see how tall they'd grown. They married in early June quietly, beneath the cottonwoods behind the cabin. Just the four of them, and a handful of neighbors who rode in with preserves and tools wrapped in canvas. Lorna wore her hair braided back with a sprig of wild mint. Elijah shaved, though he cut his chin doing it, and Samuel laughed every time he saw the spot. At night, Lorna and Elijah sat on the porch, fingers entwined, watching the sky stretch wide above them. Sometimes they spoke, but often they didn't. They didn't need to fill the space. It was enough to be there, shoulder to shoulder, knowing the worst had passed and the rest was theirs to build. The land did not offer ease. There were fences to mend, feed to carry, and winters that would always find their way back. But the work no longer felt like a thing survived alone. It was shared now, held between them like the light that slipped through the cottonwoods each morning. And when the nights grew long again, and the wind began to howl across the valley once more, the fire inside the cabin never faltered. Because love, once rooted, does not break in the storm. It endures, it grows, and in that quiet stretch of land where fear had once lived, something stronger had taken its place. Something that looked like peace, something that felt like home.